Welcome, everyone, to our 11th class in this particular series. To remind everyone, we are in this ongoing class of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, the 7 universal laws for all of mankind. So right now, we are in the middle of studying from a Talmudic, a halakhic encyclopedia called the S'dei Chemed. Volume 8, and the page that we're on right now is 3218. And this is the section which begins with Goy, non-Jew, and he's going through in great detail and bringing down many sources of various different rabbis, codifiers, commentators of the past couple hundred years, as far as we're taking certain legal concepts that we know in the Jewish code of law, how they apply to Jews. And the question is, do they, when do they, and if they do, how do they apply to the Ben Noach, to the non-Jew? So some of these pieces are short and some of them are long. So right now, we're in the middle of one which is quite long, and that is the concept of Bitul. Bitul beroiv, nullification. If something forbidden gets mixed into a larger quantity of something which is permitted. So do we say that the forbidden entity becomes legally, by Jewish law, a non-entity, and therefore the whole thing is still permitted? So in Jewish law, it's very specific, very detailed, and very clear. I mean, in certain cases there are arguments amongst the authorities, but it's all clear. We have rules, and we know how to apply, what to apply, etc., as we've discussed at great length in the previous classes. A verse that we're dealing with, which seems to be the primary source for the whole concept of bitul, of nullification, is from Exodus. It says, Achrei Rabim Lahatois, which basically means you are to follow the majority. Majority rules. That works as far as many things go. The simple meaning of that verse is regarding judges, that if there are different opinions when judging a particular case, whether it's two litigants or whether it's one individual who is on for trial for committing a certain sin, and of course there's testimony of two witnesses, and there's examinations and cross-examinations, etc. And then, at the end of the day, we need to determine whether the person is innocent or guilty, whether he's to be punished or not. So, in Jewish law, ideally, the court is made up of a number of judges, and it should ideally be an odd number of judges. So if everybody votes in a definitive way, there is no stalemate. It doesn't get into a situation where we are unsure. That's ideal. The regular court are 3 members. However, in order to judge a capital case, capital offense or whatever, you need 23 members. And every city in the land of Israel, and this is during the times of the Holy Temple, every major city was required, it was actually a commandment, to have a court of 23 members. And then you have one Supreme Court. You have a number of Supreme Courts, but you have the highest court of all, which was 71 members. Again, as you notice, it's all odd numbers, 3, 23, 71. And there are other cases where sometimes you have 7, but the common thing is that it's always an odd number, ideally. So you go by the majority. If you have 3 people, 2 vote one way, these are judges. 2 vote one way, 1 votes the other way, the 2 win, and whether it is to be lenient or to be strict, we follow the majority of 2. Okay, that is the simple reading of that verse. But then, question is, what about other things where we're not dealing with the votes of the judges ruling a case? So there too, we go by the majority, biblically speaking. So the question is, by Bnei Noach, do we do that as well? And most common discussion in Jewish law with regards to Jews is with regard to food. The mixture of non-kosher food with kosher food, or the mixture of meat and dairy, or vice versa. And we have rules. So the question is, that we're dealing with, as we discussed, what type of food is forbidden for non-Jews to eat? Only one type of food. And that is anything which falls under the category of Aver Min Hachai. A limb or any part, including blood, which came from a living creature and was separated and detached from that living creature before that creature was dead. That is forbidden for any human consumption, Jew or non-Jew. That's all that non-Jews are not allowed to eat. So it all depends. So can Jews eat chicken? It depends. Same answer would be for Jews. Can non-Jews eat chicken? It depends. A Jew can only eat a chicken if it was slaughtered ritually correctly, and if it was salted and soaked in a proper way, and there were no defects found, etc., etc. And then yes, a Jew can eat chicken. But otherwise, you can't just eat any chicken. And similarly with a non-Jew, a Ben Noach. Can a Ben Noach eat chicken? Well, yes, unless it is Aver Min Hachai. Then he can't. Difference being that a non-Jew is allowed to eat any living creature as long as it's not Aver Min Hachai. Which obviously means there's many, many more things that the Ben Noach can eat that a Jew can't. All right, so then we brought down one of the commentaries on the commentaries of the Code of Law, known as the Pri Megadim, where he actually raises the question as to whether we do or don't apply the concept of Bitul, of nullification, that the minority becomes nullified in the greater. Do we apply that to Bnei Noach or not? And then we said that there's a Chasam Soifer, another one of the great rulers, authorities in Jewish law. He speaks about it, and now we're up to the middle of the second column, the left-hand column. Again, page 3218, left-hand column, right in the middle paragraph with the large word Uma. All right, so we're in the middle of a discussion over here. Uma shekosav hagoim benoida b'Yehuda, and that which was written by the great genius known as the Noida b'Yehuda. That was the name of his responsa, of his books that he wrote, where he's basically responding to questions in Jewish law that were presented to him. So he says, Dilchumra azlinan gam bedidhu basa ruba, that in order to be strict, we do follow the majority, even by them, by the non-Jews. V'chein nokit hagoyin shoylu meishi v'madura chamisha simon yud v'div ramaschel v'ina noida b'Yehuda chidesh v'chulu. And likewise in another book, also he says the same thing, quoting the Noida b'Yehuda, that when it comes to being strict, we then do apply the concept of going by the majority. V'toma olav hagoyin bris Yankiv kanis galeil, and the genius, the Bris Yaakov, which is another authoritative writing, he is asking, he's bewildered on this opinion that we just mentioned of the Noida Behuda. Hinegam b'shalas v'tshuvas riva simen zokein hanis galeil b'dibur maskul kfi hanire toma olav. Now an additional responsa, known as the Riva, he too is bewildered with this approach of the Noida Yehuda. V'zel shoynoi, and we quote, Masha kosavta b'sheim ben hanoida b'Yehuda. That which you wrote, this is what he's writing to someone, that which you wrote in the name of the Noida Yehuda, that although we don't find such a verse of following the majority with regards to Bnei Noach, which was discussed earlier, that's the side to say that it doesn't ever apply to Bnei Noach, and we don't go by the majority, and even the minority has to be reckoned with, and is known, even if it's 1 in 1,000, you have to realize that it's there, and it's not considered a non-entity, but it definitely is an entity, and it's there. The reason we say that is because the verse that says Achrei Rabbim, go after the majority, is clearly being written with regards to Jews. So since we don't have such a verse to apply to the non-Jew, why do we apply it? Why would you say so? Nonetheless, but to be strict, we do follow the majority. Lahamisoi, to put him to death. What do you mean? What do we mean? So again, normally, if you follow the majority, that would be a leniency. Again, a little bit of non-kosher meat fell into a pot of kosher meat being cooked. And there's no way to tell which piece is what. It all got mixed together, and it's cooking together. So to say follow the majority, that would be a leniency. And the same thing for Bnei Noach. If you have a little bit of Aver min achai, forbidden meat, and it fell into kosher, forbidden Noach meat, and it's cooking together, so to say we follow the majority would be a leniency. So we don't say it to be lenient. We only say it to be strict. What does that mean? Well, the case would be as follows. Lo yodif mi Yisrael, because the Ben Noach is no better than the Jew. Vadai denerag, that the Jew is put to death. In what case are we talking? Im ba al eshes aviv le Rabbi Akiva. According to the Mishnaic sage, the great famous Rabbi Akiva, who he holds that it is a capital offense that the Jewish court would be required to put the person to death if someone had marital relations with his father's wife. Even if it's not his mother. His father's wife, this is a capital offense. Now, we go by the majority, and we put him to death. What majority are we talking about? Most people don't do that. That's not what we mean. The majority is that people's fathers are, in fact, their fathers. There is a very small minority of people that they assume that a certain individual is their father, when in fact it is not their biological father. It happens. Unusual, an extremely small percentage that wouldn't know it, but that a person grows up assuming that so-and-so is his biological father, and in fact, that person isn't. That's a minority. And yet we go by the majority. And we assume that his father is his father, and therefore his wife is this person's father's wife. Because if it ain't his father, then there's no problem. See, so this is not his mother, because mothers, we know for certain, without any assumptions, That we know for sure who a person's biological mother is. The father, though, can never be sure. So if a person had relations with his own mother, that's not a majority, that's not a doubt. That's for sure a capital offense. But for someone's father's wife that's not his mother, how do we know that this is actually his father? And therefore this woman is his father's wife. So we're going by the majority. And we're not concerned, Dilma, perhaps, Lav Avivu. Maybe it's not his father. No, we don't say that. And therefore, by a Jew, the law is that if a Jew had relations with his father's wife, that is a capital offense. And he's put to death. So we're saying we do the same thing by Bnei Noach. So wait a second. I thought Bnei Noach don't go after the majority. So why would we put a Ben Noach to death if he had relations with his father's wife? Why is that incest? Only majority speaking, this is his father. In all probability, it's his father. There's a chance it's not his father. And yet we say, no, by Bnei Noach to be strict, we do go by the majority. Ein nire klal l'chalik bedin d'oraisa. Bein lahakel l'lahachmir. So he says, it does not seem sensible at all that when you're talking on a biblical level, to make a distinction between being strict and being lenient. It's either you follow the majority or you don't follow the majority. How in the world would we say that biblically speaking, for a Ben Noach, to be lenient, we don't go by the majority. But to be strict, we do. We need to be consistent. Either you follow the majority or you don't. Uviderabanan matzinu sheichmiru al hager lo yisri krevas aviv. Now, biblically though, we do find, and this makes sense, biblically speaking, we find that the rabbis at a certain point, they were strict with a convert, a non-Jew who became a ger, converted and became Jewish. So now, that person, biblically speaking, has no non-Jewish relatives. His biological parents are not his parents, legally speaking, by Jewish law. Biblically speaking, legally speaking, he became a Jew, which means he has no parents. Spiritually, it's Abraham and Sarah. Biologically, irrelevant. Doesn't apply. Okay? And therefore, listen to this scenario. Biblically speaking, before the rabbis stepped into the picture, a person who converts and becomes Jewish, and his biological mother does the same, he is allowed to marry his mother. She's not his mother. She's just a woman who biologically conceived and carried him and bore him. But they were not Jewish. So when they're not Jewish, he is his mother. As two non-Jews, mother-son relationship. Yes. And they're not allowed to marry each other. But now they became Jewish, each one individually is converted to Judaism. So therefore, biblically, there's no relationship between the two of them. But the rabbi said that it wouldn't look proper for them to be able to marry each other, because it would look like becoming Jewish was a step down, because beforehand these two people were forbidden with each other. And now that they both converted and became Jewish, they're allowed to marry each other. So that looks like becoming Jewish is a step down, where in fact that's quite the contrary. So therefore, they said, no, we're not going to allow something which was forbidden when they were both not Jewish. Now what about this case? A non-Jew, a Ben Noach, converts and becomes a Jew, a ger. What about the relatives of his non-Jewish father, his non-Jewish father's wife? So, the rabbis were strict that he's not allowed to have relations, to get married with his father's relatives. Again, as we said, so that nobody can say that, oh, we came from a stricter level of sanctity and we went down a level by becoming Jewish. But biblically, we don't find such a thing. So yes, rabbinically speaking, we do find where they make a distinction and they're being strict for their reasons. But we don't find that biblically you're strict but not lenient. Either you go by the rule and therefore everything across the board is consistent, whether it'll end up sometimes being strict, sometimes it'll end up being lenient. Whichever way. So take a look there, the Sham, and over there, Herich, he elaborated, Liyashiv Akushya, to answer the question, that if a Ben Noyach is put to death for having relations with his father's wife, that means that we do go by the majority. So he answers that problem. The Maharam Shik, which is another great authority, he too writes that it doesn't make sense to differentiate between being strict and being lenient. Are we being strict on a Ben Noyach? On the contrary, we're lenient. If anything, we are looking to be lenient for a Ben Noyach. So, if you don't follow the majority, you have to be consistent, and don't even follow the majority in a case of being strict, such as his mother's wife. Don't go by the majority, across the board, through and through. So they're asking, where do we find this idea that, well, by Bnei Noyach, it doesn't say go by the majority, and therefore we generally don't unless it's a matter of being strict. I say, no, that's not fair, that's not right. On what grounds are we saying that? It sounds like it's rabbinic. Well, where do we find that the rabbis made that edict? Biblically, it doesn't make sense to say such a thing, that we're only strict with Bnei Noyach when it comes to the majority, but we're not lenient. Next paragraph. V'hinei, banit pas tziyanti la'ayin b'sefer nachlas yankiv lagoyim ba'al sefer makar Chaim. Chelik hasheni siman gimel daf lamed vav amud aleph. Okay, so he says like this. In the printed, I have mentioned to take a look in a certain book called Nachalas Yaakov, and it tells us exactly where it is over there. Medini, with regards to the law, do we follow the majority when it comes to Bnei Noach? Which is the question at hand. Likewise, does the concept of halacka work by them? I believe we've discussed this. Halacka is a technical legal term which means, until proven otherwise, this is the absolute assumption. There are different levels of halacka, but generally speaking, that is what a halacka is. It is a strong legal assumption, and it's very strong, that even though literally we don't know beyond a doubt for sure that, whatever the case is, but because it falls into this category, then this is the fact until it is proven otherwise. For example, there is a capital offense for a Jew to strike his parent. So if he strikes his parent and actually wounds them, if he makes them bleed, that is a capital offense. So if a person does it to his mother, understood, to be put to death, as long as there was a proper warning and witnesses, etc., that if he did it with intent. How can you ever put a person to death for striking his father? There's a chance it's not really his father. And yet, according to the Torah, a Jew is put to death for striking his father. Why is that? Chazaka. There's a very strong hold, an assumption that his father is in fact his father. And there are many, many, many cases of chazaka. It really applies in so many cases. So the question is, does this concept at all apply to Bnei Noach? In other words, can we ever assume something which we don't literally know 100%? What I wanted to do was at least to inform you of his conclusion of this Nachlas Yaakov. Okay, so now with help of Hashem, I am going to fill in that which is missing, which I didn't tell you the conclusion. Voimar, and let me say, Shadas Hagoin Sham, that the opinion of this genius there, the Gam Bibnei Noach Hazlin and Basaruba, that yes, in fact, we do go according to the majority by Bnei Noach. We do follow the majority. And like the opinion of the above mentioned Eidus b'Yosef, Vihu Shenishal, and here is the question that he was asked. This is the question that came to the Eidus b'Yosef. Bria Shenimtzu ba Shloisha Teloyim. Now, this is a whole discussion in laws of kosher, which is actually extremely relevant nowadays for Jews. And non-Jews. This is actually, this point here, without deviating and getting too off topic, this is an entire lecture in and of itself. And that is bugs. Bugs. Insects. Infestation. It's a very severe prohibition. The Torah forbids eating insects, even the very, very small ones that are not literally microscopic, but they're very hard to detect, very difficult to find. And many times they're camouflaged, like the green ones that fit right into those leafy or green whatever vegetables. So, it's a big problem, and it's been discussed, and the problem has been an obvious problem for quite some time, and some places are worse than others. Basically, leafy vegetables, lettuce, some types of cabbage, and then you have things like spinach and broccoli. They, generally speaking, have insects in them. And for a Jew, let's start with that, to eat one single insect is just as bad, if not worse, than eating an ounce of pork. It may be difficult to view it that way because, like everybody knows, can't eat pork. Ugh. I'm a Jew. Don't eat pork. Okay, very nice. Do we have the same repulsive reaction when I say, oh, that lettuce has got a couple of tiny little bugs? What's a bug? It's so small. No. And there's a separate prohibition for the kind that fly, for the kind that are creeping, crawling ones on the earth, and for the ones that are in water, and some of them are both, some are all three. It could really go up there as far as the numbers of how many sins it is. It's a very serious offense, and it's so difficult to avoid. So there are different ways that different kosher supervision organizations have come up with how to check them, how to clean them. It's a whole process that they've done a lot of experiments on it. And there are a few different opinions as to what's the most effective way of doing it: hot water, cold water, and soak it with salt. It's a whole process. And then you hopefully got rid of the bugs. Then the question is, part of the way they do it is they soak it, and then they take the water and they put it through a cloth, a white cloth, and then they see, as the water goes through them, they see, did it catch any of these insects, any bugs? And if it did, and they do a second time, and then sometimes if you check a leaf, and if there's found 3 bugs on a particular leaf, then forget it, that whole head may not be. So there's a lot of laws. What a lot of people don't realize is if those bugs are alive, which I would guess, I don't know, I would guess that's usually the case, but maybe not. If those bugs are alive, seemingly they're forbidden for Bnei Noach as well. Aver min achai. You cannot eat a living creature. Not only that, if the wing was plucked off that mosquito or whatever smaller insect before the insect was killed, that wing is forever forbidden. So what do you do? So it's a problem. So it's not so simple. So many people, many kosher observant Jews, simply stay away from all those healthy vegetables. No broccoli, no spinach, no, what do you call those green little stalks? Asparagus, no asparagus. It's a pretty long list. Lettuce. And the dark green ones are really supposed to be very healthy. I guess that's why the bugs are attracted to it, because it's so healthy. And no. So some people, what they do is, they will not serve any lettuce. You will see, you'll notice it. Now that I bring it to your attention, if you come to their home, their salad, which consists of tomatoes, cucumbers, perhaps onions, peppers, no lettuce. Others have a very strong light box that they use, where they would place each leaf on top of the light box, where then you could really see clearly what's going on, and then you'd be able to detect it. It's a lot of work. And then there are these cut up vegetables, which have kosher certification. And there's some competition there as well. There's a company. The name of the company is called Bodek. Bodek means check, that they're checked. And some of these items or companies, they write kosher, has been washed, has been checked, and we suggest that you check it yourself too. But a light box, for example, such as this, that would probably do the job. You take something like this, a light, very strong light, and you place the leaf right on top of it, and you'll see, wow, you could really, the light penetrates, and you look at it, and you can then detect if there are any bugs. Or you have a bigger light box. It's a lot of work. It is not simple. What I'm mentioning now is it may be a problem for Bnei Noach as well. So it's not just a problem for a Jew to eat all of these different types of things which can have bugs in it. The bugs are living, it could be a problem for Bnei Noach. So now, after having said that, V'hu nishal, 6 lines down in the last paragraph on page 3218. And he was asked, Bria, a creature, a full creature, like a bug, Shenim Tzuba, Shloisha Toiloyim, that was found in it 3 insects. Okay, whatever it may be, you found something, whether it's a fruit, a vegetable, something which has in it 3 insects in that one particular fruit or vegetable. Fasur li Yisrael. Therefore, it's forbidden for Jews to eat, because number 3 is a very important role in what we were discussing before about chazaka. When we said chazaka, which means a very strong hold, and it is to absolutely be assumed that this is the fact until proven otherwise. So 3 plays an important role there when it comes to chazaka. So too here, if you have a leaf or whatever that has 3 insects found on it, forget it. That's called infested. And it's forbidden for a Jew. So the question is, this is what he was asked. Can the Jew then sell it to a ben noyach, to a non-Jew? He's not allowed to eat it because of Eiver min achai. He can't eat insects. And now the Jew who sells it to the non-Jew, this is the question, would be transgressing. Do not place a stumbling block before a blind person, which we've discussed this many times. And again, just to reiterate, not only is a Jew not permitted to transgress any of the commandments of the Torah, he cannot be, I don't know if the word is an accomplice, but he cannot cause anyone else to stumble. Can't be the cause. If there's something which is non-kosher, Jew can't sell it to a non-Jew, to another Jew. Not allowed. In other words, I cannot mind my own business. My fellow is my business. Again, we're not saying I have to go out of my way and stop him from doing what he's doing wrong on his own, but I cannot be the cause of it. So if there's, let's just say, an observant Jew who keeps the dietary laws of kosher, and then he knows of another Jew who, unfortunately, doesn't yet keep those laws properly, and unfortunately, is eating non-kosher food. And now, the kosher Jew has this non-kosher food. So he says, well, what am I going to do with it? Throw it out? Why don't I just give it or sell it to my neighbor? That is absolutely prohibited. Big sin. I cannot be the cause of him. He's going to do it anyway. He's going to go to the store and buy it anyway. That's unfortunate. That's his business. And even then, I'm supposed to do my best to rebuke and try to stop him, influence him, whatever. But surely I cannot put a stumbling block before him. Okay? May I put a stumbling block before a ben noyach to transgress one of his commandments? And as we spoke before, let's say that it is forbidden to kill. It's one of the 7 Noachite commandments. And a ben noyach comes over to me and he wants to buy a weapon in order to go kill another person. Can I say that I want to mind my own business? I'll sell it to him. What he does with it, that's his business. Nope. I provided him with a weapon. That is a sin. Not allowed to. Now, it's an extreme case, obviously, but that's the idea. So, the question that was asked over here of the Eidus B'Yosef is if there is some food which is forbidden for a Jew to eat because it has 3 insects, can that Jew sell it to the Ben Noyach? Because the Ben Noyach is not allowed to eat insects, live insects, either. So that would be the difference, by the way. A Jew can't eat them whether they're dead or alive. And a Ben Noyach is allowed to eat them if they're dead. So that is a big difference. The Heshiv. And he answered, this is his response to the question. To the Shitas HaRambam, that according to the understanding, the opinion of Maimonides, the Rambam, the Choymer Asfeikois, Hurak Midrabanon. We've discussed this in a previous class, that when you are in doubt, so here's the rule. If it's a biblical case, a biblical level doubt, where I don't know if it's permitted or forbidden biblically, you have to always be strict. And if it's a rabbinic edict, and we're in doubt as to whether rabbinically it's permitted or forbidden, then you're lenient. But now the question is, that which we need to be strict, when it comes to a biblical case, is that rule a biblical requirement? That biblically speaking, by a biblical doubt, we have to be strict? Or is that rule rabbinic? That biblically speaking, any doubt is fine, and you don't have to be strict. But rabbinically speaking, if it's a biblical doubt, then you have to be strict. According to Maimonides, it is only rabbinic. In other words, biblically, anytime there's a doubt, we're allowed to assume that it's good, that it's permitted. But rabbinically speaking, if it's a biblical level doubt, you have to be strict. Because whenever the Torah prohibits things, it's only in an absolute way. Only in a for sure way. Like we said a while ago, that when there's the warning, we know that the witnesses have to give up, or there has to be a proper warning given to the person in order for him to be liable for the penalty, for the punishment. And the warning has to be a definitive, absolute one. They can't tell the person, you know what you're doing might be forbidden. That doesn't count. They said that to the person, and everything else is in place. There's 2 proper witnesses. The man is holding the weapon. He's about to murder. And either the witnesses or a bystander, whatever it was, somebody says to him, do you know that what you're doing might be forbidden? And the guy says, I don't care, and then he commits the sin. He is not able to be put to death for that. Because that's not a warning. You can't say might, or maybe, or perhaps. It's got to be an absolute. They have to tell him what you're about to do is forbidden. There's no maybe. So same thing. Whenever the Torah says something is forbidden, it's only if it's absolute, not maybes. Pshita, so in that case, according to this, which is Maimonides' approach, the gam leven noyach mutar, therefore would also be permitted for ben noyach. So you hear what we're going over here? This is what he answered. That just as for the Jew, a doubt is, biblically speaking, permitted, so too for the ben noyach. The Chazal lo yasur asfekes lebnei noyach. And the only thing is, for the Jew, rabbinically speaking, he has to stay away from the doubt. And then he says, but we don't find that the rabbis gave that stringency of a doubt to the bnei noyach. And therefore, any time where there is a doubt as to whether something is forbidden or not, even, so to say, rabbinically speaking, it is permitted for the ben noyach. So let's get back to the fruit, or the vegetable, the leaf. A Jew is not allowed to eat it. Why can't I eat that entire head of lettuce? Because we found 3 bugs. Okay? Biblically speaking, I can eat it. I don't have to be worried that maybe there's more bugs there, or probably there's more bugs there. Rabbinically speaking, I'm forbidden to eat it. Okay? So that is a stringency which the rabbis introduced. They never did that for Bnei Noach. We don't find that. So therefore, since it's only a doubt as to whether this is biblically forbidden, because we don't know for a fact that there are more bugs in this food, therefore, I would be allowed to feed it, I would be allowed to give it or sell it to a Ben Noach. And he can eat it, so long as he doesn't know for certain that there are live bugs there. Uv'shem harav hashoyel kosav, the gamla soivim dechomer asvekas min haTorah. Then he writes as follows, that even according to the other opinion, not Maimonides, those that maintain that this rule, that when it comes to a biblical prohibition, we need to be strict biblically, hainu midgale rachmana b'mamzer de safek shari v'chulu. That's because we know this. Where do we find it biblically speaking? Because the Torah has revealed to us that when it comes to a mamzer, which is the product of a relationship that was a capital offense, that's a mamzer. Like brother and sister, if they had relations and they produced a child, that's a mamzer. But what about if we're not sure if someone is a mamzer? What status does that person then have? So we say that that person would be permitted. Well, Bnei Noach, did lo nitna Torah. Now, Bnei Noach, the Torah was not given to them. Shari, then it's permitted. Because of Aldvarav de'enoi Noach loy. But then he wrote that this is not comfortable for him. The Yeshloimar, because we could say, the Guli Milsa Ba'almahu, the Loi Neima, this Varas Chutz, Hulahatios Fekois. That which we say, that it permits, that we find that doubts are permitted. The Imkain Lamali Krab Mamzer Lahatir. So why do I need a verse to allow a mamzer that's a doubt? Why wouldn't I just know it, logically speaking? El al korchen de misvara safik asur kevadai. Therefore, he says no, because logically speaking, a doubt would be as strictly forbidden as something which you know for certainty. That's why I need a specific verse to tell me otherwise. Because of oid, and then he writes further, umash nistapik foitoi rasoi, and that which you have a doubt, whether we follow the majority and whether we follow chazaka when it comes to the non-Jews, to me only, I am bewildered. Just as we derive in the beginning of tractate Chulin, how do we know that we follow the majority? What's the biblical source that Jews go by the majority? Mimake aviv, by striking one's father, as we said. That it's a capital offense, but you don't know for sure that it's his father. Yet we say, but no, there's a chazaka, and the majority is that it is his father. Now Maimonides, in his laws of forbidden relations, he brought the opinion that's brought on from the Jerusalem Talmud, that is actually the source, the Torah source for this whole concept of chazaka. How do we know that we are to assume to the complete, furthest degree, something, even though we literally don't know it to be a fact? Because the Torah says that someone who strikes his father is put to death. So there you see, only based on a chazaka. And there's no contradiction to this statement from the Talmud. Likewise, We'll say the same thing by Ben Noach, top of the next page. Midas Torah, Eishes of Ben Noach. From the fact that the Torah forbids a person to have relations with his father's wife, for Bnei Noach as well. So wait a second. Dil malav avivu. It may not be his father. Val karchin does lina basaruba. Af beruba deleise. Come on. So what do we see here? That we do follow the majority, even when it is a case of a majority which is not in front of us, like we discussed previously a while back. The kolshkin beruba deise. Come on. And surely, if it's a matter of roiv that's in front of us, like a mixture of permitted food with forbidden food, Aver min achai got mixed into something, it's all in front of us. The gam nire, it also seems, the krod achre rabbim, that this verse that says, follow the majority, hu gam kin beven noyach, that it also does apply to bnei noyach, the verse. Bedayonim, with regards to judges, shadonin bnei noyach. Hazlin basar ruba, lischus ulechiyuv. Vu bichlal adinin shnistav bnei noyach. K'moi shekasav harambam, shnistav al adinin, shnemer liYisrael. Now, one of the 7 mitzvahs bnei noyach, actually, if you want to organize them, categorize them, it's really number 7. And that is dinim, courts of law. To set up a system where there's accountability and that people are judged for keeping the 6 laws. Now, you have a judicial system. Well, in that case, the verse that is speaking about judges, Jewish judges, should apply to Bnei Noach because they too have judges. So it's not like, oh, it's a foreign concept or it's a Jewish concept. No. It's not like you're bringing me a verse about tefillin or mezuzah or matzah on Passover. Those are clearly commandments for the Jews. The verse is a verse which is speaking about judging. That surely is connected to non-Jews as well. It's one of the Sheva Mitzvahs Bnei Noach. As the Rambam says, that the Bnei Noach are commanded on judging, just like it was given to the Jews. Kid going, for example, oines umefate ushar dinim shebi Yisrael, such as rape or seducing, which there is a fine that a person has to pay. We're talking about that the girl was not married, because if she's married, then that is a capital offense. But otherwise, if a person committed this sin with a non-married girl, so there is a very specific fine in the Torah. And the Rambam says that would apply to the Bnei Noach as well. And this includes also appointing judges. I mentioned at the beginning of the class today that there is a commandment that the Jewish people have to appoint judges in every city, 23 judges at the gate of every city. According to Maimonides, this applies to the non-Jews as well. They have a mitzvah of appointing judges as well. As he says in the 10th chapter of the Laws of Kings. And therefore, of course, so the rule applies. Follow the majority of judges. And likewise, when it comes to cross-examining, there's a concept in Jewish law which one might think, oh, that's just a Jewish thing. No, since it has to do with courts and judging and witnesses and testimony, it does apply, he says, to the non-Jews. And that is, if 2 people came and testified to something, and afterwards 2 other people came and said that on that exact time that you claim to have witnessed such and such an event in such and such a place, you guys were with us somewhere else on that very day. So we're not saying that what you're testifying is false and that never happened. We're just saying that you couldn't have been witnesses who saw that because you were with us. So the halakha is, the Jewish law is, you automatically believe the second set. I mean, of course, we interrogate everybody, but second set is believed. And the first set, very interesting. What do you do to the first witnesses? What's their punishment? Whatever they were trying to do with their testimony to the fellow on trial. So if they were trying to make him lose money, they now have to pay that money. If they wanted him to get the lashes, they now have to get the floggings. If they wanted to put him to death by their testimony, they are put to death. That applies to non-Jews as well. This is how their court system should work. And all the other laws. In other words, we're not left in the dark or up to guessing, or you don't have to reinvent the wheel and say, well, there's a mitzvah, a commandment, for the non-Jewish world to set up a court system. Well, let's figure it out. No, you don't have to figure it out. Follow the Jewish court system. Because that whole area of those mitzvahs, of civil laws, are laws which would apply to non-Jews as well. It's not between man and Hashem, man and God. Of course, everything is. But it's between man and his fellow man, including the penalty for transgressing any of those civil laws. You're going to say, wait a second. Maimonides tells us that there is a difference. He says by a non-Jew, he can be put to death based on testimony of one witness. There's no such thing in Jewish law. It's always got to be two witnesses. And also it could be one judge. One single individual judge can put a person to death by the Bnei Noach. In Jewish law, there's no such thing. You have to have at least 23 judges for a capital. So he says, okay, good point. So one answer, one possible answer, maybe that is part of the oral tradition. That in those particular cases, those are different. Otherwise, if I don't have a reason or an exception, then I say it's just like the Torah law for the Jew. But in these instances, that A, it could be one witness, and B, it could be one judge. That is a specific tradition that we were taught, that Hashem said to Moses, that by Bnei Noach, that's how it works. Or it could be that we derive it from a certain verse in the Torah. Otherwise, though, Vishar Dinim and all the other laws, there's no difference between those laws and the Jewish judgment. If so, therefore, it's obvious and it's simple that we do follow the majority and we do apply chazaka to the non-Jew just like the Jew. And just like for a Jew who strikes his father, that Jew is to be put to death, even though it's only a chazaka, that's his father. So too by a non-Jew who has relations with his father's wife, he too is to be put to death, even though it's only his father based on chazaka. So in other words, across the board, Roiv and chazaka do apply for Bnei Noach as well, just like by Jews. And that which you wrote, Lahatir Medini Bitul Beroiv Libnei Noach, Deloika Primigodim. You wrote that you wanted to allow, like this Aver Min HaChai food that got mixed in, that you should follow the majority, which is not like the Prima Godim that we brought down, like he says. Shehevin Deloy Mahani Bitul Beroiv Leben Noach. The Prima Godim, who's the one who brought up this question in the first place, does it or doesn't it apply? So he says that Bitul, that to nullify something, that something should become nullified, does not apply for Bnei Noach. Hu emes baror, this is absolutely true. You surely do apply the verse that go after the majority for Bnei Noach as well. And I have another clear proof from Maimonides, in the 9th chapter of Laws of Kings, the Ben Noach Chayiv be'ever min hachai, a Ben Noach is chayav, he is transgressing, it's a capital offense for him to eat aver min hachai, ube basar min hachai, or either a limb from a living animal or flesh of a living animal, b'chol shehu. What's the amount? Any amount. Ve'aver min hachai uksheyesh boi basar gidim vatzomis. And the definition of a limb from a live animal is if it has flesh, veins, and bone. V'im kein if so, tikshi lomali azharas aver min hachai, al belavach ibn chayiv ala basar b'chol shehu, sheyesh noy al aver. So he says, wait a second. If there's no set amount, and it's either a limb, or if he eats flesh, and then you define limb has to have on it flesh, vein, and bone. Well, it doesn't make sense. You just said flesh by itself is already, he's liable for that. So what do I need to have the definition of a limb? And why do you have to tell me limb? Flesh by itself. If limb has to be flesh and vein and bone, and together with that you tell me that flesh by itself he's also, so there's never a case of a limb. I mean, it's always because of the flesh. Val korchin di ilavas had a sever min achai haya potter kishoichel ha'ever da basar batul beroiv gidim vatzomes sheboy. She says, no, I'll tell you why. If not for the explicit prohibition of not being allowed to eat a limb of a live animal, if he would eat the limb, which means meat, the flesh, along with the veins and the bone, he would not be transgressing the prohibition of eating meat, eating the flesh. Why? Because that's a minority compared to the bone and the veins on that limb. So from here we see clearly that there is the concept of bitul beroiv by bnei noyach. Because if the Torah has to explicitly forbid meat, flesh, separately, and aver min hachai separately, that means that just eating aver min hachai is not considered eating the flesh, because there's more of all the other stuff on that limb. There's more bone and veins than there is flesh. The lav bichlal basar ninu, and they're not meat, they're not flesh. Leman domer ein begidim daisin tam. If you're going to say that the veins don't really give a taste. Elu teirif divrei kodshoy. This is the gist of his holy words. Harei mefurash yoytze, so it comes out clearly, shadas hagoin, that the opinion of this great genius, meaning the Edus b'Yosef, to Mahani Bitul Beroiv Leben Noyach, clearly it does apply the concept of nullifying something, that something becomes nullified in the majority. V'chein chazaka, and likewise this concept of chazaka does apply to Bnei Noyach. Ella shebaga lemar nechdoi hu agoyin morar avram to'imim kosav. The only thing is, in a footnote to his grandson, known as the great Rabbi Avram To'imim, he wrote lahashiv al kol harayos shel agoyin ha'mechaber, that he to answer or to refute all the proofs of this genius. However, one thing is that this author does hold like the Edus b'Yosef, and that is that for Bnei Noyach we do say Bitul Beroiv as well as Chazaka. Now he's going to go on and say, well, what about, what did he write to his grandson? And then he's going to get into that. But we're really out of time now. And presumably, it seems like next class we should be able to finish this subject before we move on to the next ones. So we are now leaving off on page Aleph Taf Reish Yud, in the middle of the right-hand column. And until next time, wishing everybody the greatest of success in studying, teaching, observing, promoting the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noyach, to keep all of the divine universal commandments that were God-given to all of mankind through Moses at Sinai, and to make this world the perfect world that it was intended to be from the very creation. And we're at that point right now as we're entering the times of Mashiach with the complete revelation of our righteous Mashiach now. Thank you.